Uh, So we are starting the side event on the margins, very margins of 69 session of Commission on Narcotic Drugs. It's the last day. Majority of people in countries already left, and those who need to vote, they are voting for resolutions right now. But anyway, the event will be published on the webpage, and this event is organized by Eurasian Harm Reduction Association and co-sponsored by Alliance for Public Health, Correlation, HRN, ECOM, Euroinput, EVNA, Helsinki Foundation for Human Rights in Poland, Harm Reduction International, International Drug Policy Consortium, International Network of People Who Use Drugs, Organization Regeneration, Right Reporter Foundation, SWAN, Drug Policy Network of Southeast Europe, Input and Social Justice Center, and Civil Society, European Civil Society Forum on Drugs. And actually, what we will discuss here, and as we are a rather cozy group of people who are all time working in this civic space, we will discuss the newest report and the data we are collecting all the time, like already for 1 year, with support of several donors, and we are very grateful to them for supporting this. We are collecting data on situation with civic space specifically for marginalized group. And you will ask why we need having civicus who are monitoring the civic space all over the globe, and specifically having mechanism in Europe monitoring civic space. Why do you need to monitor the civic space specifically for communities of people who use drugs, community of sex workers, of LGBT people, and people living with HIV? Why do you need to collect this data specifically? And answer will be in our presentation today, because in addition to our Rise and Decriminalize movement, all networks of marginalized community united, this specific movement shows that criminalization of key populations somehow connected with criminalization of advocates and organizations. And now the whole movement, we stopped doing majority of our advocacy around the criminalization of communities, or we continue to do this, but in addition to this, we need to protect our activists from arrests because they are activists. So, and that was my intro, and I'm coming to you, Zaved, for general introduction on where you are seeing the challenges in civic space and liberties globally, and how this freedoms connected with the drug policy.
Thank you very much. I apologize for coming a little late. I was trying to follow the plenary, all this voting going on now. Good morning to everyone. And also I would like to thank OHCHR Harm Reduction Association, Input, and other colleagues for organizing this event. First, I would like to mention one thing, that meaningful participation of the civil society and the community, particularly community of people who use drugs, is critical to advancing the effective drug policy, which is based on evidence, human rights, public health, that one. And why it is critical? Because they are at the forefront on the ground, and people who need support, they are in touch with them. So definitely they are the first line of support system. And also civil society regularly just collecting information, supporting information, liaison with the people who need support. All this actually just put them in a critical mass, that who can support policymaker in the country at the international level and different level to providing information and guidance. In this regard, we think that meaningful participation should be considered as a human rights issue. And we have that, there is even principles on participation. Right to participation means every stages of policymaking and implementation. It's not only policymaking, but implementation of policies. You asked me one question, that what are the challenges? Dear colleagues, recently we organized in Geneva, with the support of your organization and others, roundtable discussion to look at what are the opportunities and challenges, both for civil society working in the drug policy field. And also what are the unique aspects of that. There is many civil society, many type of civil society are working on different issues, but why this group of civil society or community is special, and what are the specificity, that also we discuss. And one of the key challenges, we have noticed that restrictive laws, which we have discussed, and these restrictive laws and regulations and controlling or giving some sort of regulatory framework for the civil society to work in an independent way, it doesn't help this kind of regulatory process when it is too restrictive. And in particularly in the East European region and Russia and Central Asia region, we see that more restrictive and repressive legislation to controlling the civil society we noticed that. Particularly the foreign agent law. We just, I think, mentioned that's also put them in a very difficult situation. Then the second issue is it is a policy and legislative restrictive environment. Then the second issue is that funding. The cut of funding, particularly in the health and development sector, is really concerning. It's happening all over the world, also including in this region and developing country. We can see that shift of funding in different sector, for example, security or other sector, increasing in the cost of decreasing the fund for development and human rights or public health sector. This is really concerning, that in this kind of environment, civil society and community, they are facing serious problem to even run their own program, and small support program for the people who need that support. Recently, UN Human Rights Commission adopted the Human Rights Council Resolution 5060/26. Possibly all of you know about that. And in this resolution, Human Rights Council emphasizes the importance of the participation of the civil society, and also the creating a conducive environment. When I'm talking about conducive environment, that's mean removing these barriers which I mentioned previously, the legislative restriction or legal restriction and the fund cut, all these barriers need to be removed. And then also just in some country, most of the countries, just civil society working under the umbrella of criminalization of drugs, that definitely create extra restriction. We know that some country, because civil society members or our partners working on harm reduction, providing support, whether it is needle or syringes and all this supported, which is not regular under the law, is not permitted. So that create also another layer of restriction. It is with regard to what kind of service they are providing. So that need for that to change, it has to be their national policy or laws need to be changed with regard to harm reduction measures and others, or decriminalization need to be taken into account. Next point I would like to mention and end with that. Drug policy related civil society, or civil society who are working on drug policy related, they need to outreach to other sector of the civil society. So I was really happy to see yesterday in our session on racism and drug policy, there is a two group of different civil society were present. Civil society who are working on racial equality, and civil society who are working on drug policy. And this kind of cross-fertilization of the civil society, or gender, now more gender related civil society are working on gender related, they're engaging with the drug policy civil society. So it is really important that outreach to other groups to bring them on board, and also human rights civil society, they don't understand fully that what is the drug policy area working that one. So there is a need for cross-fertilization, knowledge sharing, and how they are also addressing this kind of restriction in their own areas. Or for example, civil society working on torture. Prevention of torture is a huge group of civil society. Now, through the subcommittee of prevention of torture, we are outreaching to them. After they published the last report, subcommittee on prevention of torture, it is a human rights treaty body established by the human rights law there, and they published last year one guidance for the national prevention mechanism, how to address prevention of torture in the context of drug policy, including ill treatment, forced treatment, detention, drug detention center, all these areas they address. And during the process of this discussion, after they published the guidance, they brought civil society working on torture in the same table, civil society working on drug policy. So this kind of avenue, I think we need to address more and bring the other civil society on board. At the end, I would like to say one thing, that OHCHR is stand ready to support civil society, community members, and people who use drugs, and continue to advance the human rights in drug policy, and ultimately just upholding the dignity in the context of international guidelines framework, as well as with other UN partner. I'm happy to see here, Ihab is here from UNODC, that with other UN partner in the context of UN common position. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zaved. Thank you very much for your constant support. That's very important. And now I will present some findings of the report. And actually, that's the first time ever a report like this we did this, specifically structuring this through the civic space dimensions, through the freedoms, actually, and using civicus as a background for the methodology. And you could see the report, it's published just less than months ago. And if you will go by this QR, and we are very, very happy to have dedicated and very important still we have, that's very good, thank you. We have absolutely amazing dedicated people from the countries, from communities, as well as legal consultants who are providing us with data. And I need to say the personal note that every month when we have the call with our focal points from countries, that's very painful, because every month we hear about more and more restrictions which affect organizations providing services to key populations. And one of the questions we are trying to answer, and I will try to answer in this presentation, why it is important to protect civic space in the context not only of the freedoms. Again, something wrong, Marsh, with the presentation.
Sorry, Anya, when I am on the presentation, I can't share any links in the chat. So I am putting now
It's
the
okay.
presentation, and I will share the link of the report later.
Afterwards.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Just
Okay.
the presentation mode.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. What make me very, very sad, because the organizations we are talking about and communities we are talking about usually are very limited in access to health services, in social care and protection of their rights. And when organizations providing harm reduction disappear or could not operate anymore because of funding or because of legal restrictions or because of arrest of the leader or arrest of the accounts or any other restrictions, then thousands or sometimes hundreds of thousands of people could losing their frontline workers, social worker, to whom they will call for support in the moment when something happening with them, when police raid is around or something like that. So that's why this specific civic space for this specific organizations is so crucial. So what we see in the next slide, that we are going very slightly through the regional trends. Next slide, Mosh. Thank you. So with the regional trends, we hope that we will have resources to have the monitoring next year, but that's the first kind of this monitoring. And what we see as for now, the several technologies or mechanisms, how the state is trying to restrict the civic space for this specific organizations working with our key populations. The one legislate or several legislations are implemented or put it in place in one time. It could be restricting the law on anti-drug propaganda, then the legislation around same-sex relations or LGBT propaganda, then language on family values and justification around the family values and public morality and child protection, and that's all justification. And then the language around the dangerous international influence or dangerous agents who are influencing the country morality or country traditions or country values. And all this language is implemented in several legislation in one time. So, and what we see as effect of it or impact of this legislation, first of all, on freedom of association, next slide, we see that foreign agent law or legislation around this undesirable organizations or foreign or stop foreign influence frameworks, specifically in several countries. The technology was developed before. It was in 2012, and it was developed by Russia and then implemented in Belarus after their protests, and now in Georgia, and we will hear the story specifically for Georgia and Kyrgyzstan, and actually in the same time in Azerbaijan, Belarus, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, situation never was easy for operation of civil society organizations, and you never could receive grants easily. In all of these countries, there is mechanism how the central government controlling grants which are received or intended to be received by civil society, and it's for a long time. With the registration procedures, people who use drugs often feel the challenges, and sex workers feel the challenges in registering organizations with open name and with open naming of their objectives and mission. And as for this international funding, just for context, we all understand that majority of services in our Eastern Europe and Central Asia countries for key populations still depend on the international funding. So if you are in like organization named as a foreign agent and couldn't receive international funding, it almost automatically means that none of people who use drugs or sex workers or LGBT could receive health services and social care, testing, the referral for treatment and all of this. So that's like we understand that's in the region, but for international community, you need to know that's very automatic. No international funding, most possible there are no services for these key groups. A part of maybe access to pills of RT treatment, but not the care and support. So that's important division. And sometimes it's even no access to opioid agonist treatment because it also depends from international support. And if organization is named as a foreign agent or undesirable organization, it most automatically, not formally, but most automatically mean that they are not invited on the table for decision making. And governmental organizations, even the center who are responsible for addiction treatment or for HIV treatment, they are afraid of inviting civil society. So it means that civil society and community organization is out of decision making, out of the possible governmental gathering, because the people who are working for government could be afraid of contacts with this foreign agent, so-called foreign agent, even though it's civil society who are registered and was operating and was providing services in the country for decades. So the next, that's actually one of the examples on law on foreign representative in Kyrgyzstan. And there are a lot of organizations who needed to re-register or to stop doing advocacy, to show that they will do influence on the government. So the organizations just stop doing advocacy, and they continue providing basic information and help to key groups vulnerable to HIV and AIDS, but with the LGBT, it's becoming very, very hard. And so the situation is that if these organizations will stop doing what they are doing or censor their informational material because of drug propaganda law or LGBT propaganda law, then the situation with HIV, hepatitis, and other health and protecting of the rights of these groups will be awful. Next, I will go to freedom of peaceful assembly, and with this freedom, you will see that formally protests are allowed in majority of these countries, but in the same time, in some of the countries, and Georgia is specific and Belarus is specific because all the people who once even posted something, and now Kazakhstan is under danger. Even post in social media around some topic could lead to arrest, and that's like social media is not protest platform, and it's not going out. And in our life of advocates for rights of people who use drugs, rights of other key populations, actually majority of our organizations self-censored their freedom of peaceful assembly. They self-censored their freedom of expression. They are not going out to street for decades already. And as for now, it's become even more dangerous. We are going, like you will see full report printed, and there are plenty of concrete indicators. I will not go for them. But as for the freedom of expression and access to information, what is dangerous for HIV and health response and protecting of rights of people? That if government saying that LGBT propaganda is banned, what is happening with the printing house where we are going with the leaflet explaining about the health risks for MSM, for LGBT? What this printing house will say to us? It is banned. Every information dedicated for our key population, like people who use drugs, sex workers, LGBT, if we have this ban of propaganda, so-called, or ban of the LGBT propaganda, they're not calling LGBT, they say gay propaganda or protecting child from the gay propaganda. If this law in place, it means that harm reduction or information is not available. And we know stories about the web pages full of health information, protecting lives, for people, but they were closed because organizations are afraid of being accused and being arrested and being fined for spreading this information. And so it's lack of access. And then we are coming to the usual component of any monitoring of civic space, how state is protecting activists. And we are coming to situation when if you are providing health services from civil society or from community to people who use drugs, in association, you are stigmatized because the use of drugs or any connection with the drugs is stigmatized and it is criminalized. So these organizations who are providing services, specifically community-led organizations who are providing services to marginalized group, they are by association criminalized or not seeking the protection and also not receiving the protection because of this criminalization. That's why we are showing this punitive drug rules and criminalization of key populations as a part of shrinking space, because that's limit our possibility to gain protection from the state mechanism which formally exists with ombudsman, with all the mechanism of complaining about the other freedoms and our rights. But as these populations are criminalized, then we have actually we are even pushed, our communities pushed out of any public discourse. Public mechanisms are impossible to use, and there is also a lot of pressure from other part of civil society who are for traditional values, who are for protecting of children and youth, and there are even very dangerous rally against our activists and our supporters and allies. So that's the concluding remarks, and I guess I delivered the message that for the shrinking civic space and threats for democracy, that's not just a threat for democracy. It's also a threat for public health and access to health services and access to protection for hundreds, thousands of people. And that's why we are highlighting these issues, and that's why we are doing every month, and I guess we could go to the first slide, Mash, if it's possible. Every quarter we are doing the updates, and just yesterday we published the recent update on the situation, and the situation becoming worse even from the moment when we published this joint report. And you could see country by country what is happening and what is initiated as a legislative restrictions. And unfortunately, it's really will lead us to the worst situation with the protection of people and protecting of their health and rights. I guess it did. Thank you.
Congratulations.
So we are moving to Kazakhstan now. Luba, are you here? We will have Lyubov Vorontsova online from Kazakhstan. No, the microphone is not.
I think it's turned on.
No, yes, it's now very good. It was good. And Lyubov Vorontsova, she is the Eurasian Women Network on AIDS coordinator, absolutely amazing sisterhood network who is supporting each other all the time. And Lyubov is from Kazakhstan, based in Kazakhstan. Please, Lyubov, story of Kazakhstan. I know that it's hard to tell.
Yes, but I try. It's like one of example that what you say about how it's happening in our region and our countries. About example about the laws for about LGBT propaganda. So I will start, and I think I need to introduce myself. My name is Lyubov Vorontsova. I live in Kazakhstan, and I would like to tell you about the current situation in my country. In March, a law banning so-called propaganda of non-traditional sexual orientation came into force in Kazakhstan. Changes were made to 8 different laws, ranging from the law on mass media to laws on education, advertising, and online platforms. This means that the restriction apply not only the media, but also to all social media, educational materials, films, sculptures, and any virtual space. Formally, the law prohibits propaganda that is the public dissemination of information about LGBTQ people that could be shape positive public opinion. However, the key problem is the legislation does not clearly define what it means, propaganda. Legal experts say that the law describes several conditionals for information to be called propaganda. The information must be shared publicly, for example, to our media or online platforms. It must also be shown that the call was to create us a positive public opinion again. But in reality, there are many questions. How will the state decide what the real invitation was? And how can anyone prove that the publication actually changed public opinion? This situation raises serious concerns among human rights defenders and civil society. When a law is written in such broad and impure terms, it can be applied subjectively and without clear rules. Any information, discussions, or public statement on LGBTQ plus issues can be interpreted as evaluation. As a result, there is a risk of serious shrinking of civic space. People begin to avoid discussing important social issues, not because they are directly prohibited, but because no one understands where the boundary of what is allowed actually lies. Such laws often lead to self-censorship that Anna said before. Activists, researchers, educational initiatives, and civil society organizations may simply stop speaking about human rights, gender equality, or sexual and reproductive health in order to avoid the risk of fines or other sanctions. This is especially dangerous for our groups, for our K population groups. When discussion of these topics is restricted, people who already face stigma and discrimination became even more invisible. Their problems stop being discussed publicly, and it become harder to advocate for protection of their rights and access to services. We can already see how it may work in practice in my country. For example, during the feminist events dedicated to March 8, unknown people entered to Vienna together with police officers and demanded that the meeting be closed. They say the organizers do some LGBT propaganda. This is a clear example of how such norms can be used to pressure civil society. And we all should to remember and should to protect our rights like civil society, because when civil space shrinking for one group, it becomes smaller for everyone. I'm over. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Lyubov, and for your struggle and for this solidarity which women group, and that's about the Kazakhstan. When the feminist group and women group were organizing the women march, supporting LGBT, being accused connected with LGBT, now supporting LGBT community in their fight, even though majority of services going down under the water. And there is one more story, and Luba was not telling it, but in the recent update, there is very dangerous process around the changes in constitution in Kazakhstan, and even word constitution is not allowed to use, like not allowed, it's just dangerous. You will be arrested to using any word of constitution in your social media posts. Having it tabled, having it the changes in the country. So as I told the rumors that people are using different other words connected with the consti something, consistency, whatever you could use to discuss at least something. But there were multiple arrests, like more than 20 people were arrested or fined for their social media activities discussing the draft of the new constitution of the country. And that's how it's affect us. It's affect immediately, because when the constitution is changing, possibility of civil society to provide services to protect people, and if constitution is stating something around gender equality or equal marriages or women's rights or sexual reproductive rights, that's actually, we could not discuss it even. Thank you. And we are going in one more country of my life. and then pain of my life, Sakartvelo, Georgia. And I'm giving floor to brave activist Maricha Heli, a lawyer and activist, and our friend and comrade for decades, who are openly will tell you a story about foreign agent FARA laws restricting of the international grants and quotas.
Thank you very much, first of all, for this opportunity to share our case. And yeah, today I'm going to represent Georgia, which is a unique country in terms of switching and shifting from pro-European, pro-democratic path into pro-Russian authoritarianism, you know, path just in less than 2 years. So in less than 2 years, more laws and amendments in legislation were adopted and enforced than in 12 plus years in Russia, for example. Everything happening so quickly, as Anna mentioned, you know, we just collecting some information, and on next day new amendments are initiated. So we just you know, and it's more and more repressive. So I will not list all of these, you know, repressive changes, because it's simply not possible in 7 minutes, etc. But just want to underline few of them. For example, gender were removed from all legislation, and just recently government started initiating and talking about remove Georgia from Istanbul Convention. And of course you understand that it will affect all women in Georgia, but especially our community groups, women using drugs, for example, sex workers, etc., etc. So I mean, at the same time, you know, several repressive legislation which affect all of civil society groups, community groups, and media are affecting its FARA, its so-called Russian law, and amendment, just recent amendments in grant legislation. So 3 legislations at the same time in parallel are enforced, and for example, definition of grant is so wide that it can affect literally everyone. So, and of course, it's also how it affect our communities. Of course, it makes our communities more, criminalized, more vulnerable, more marginalized, and more invisible. And also, after adopting and enforcing this legislation, 99% of Georgian NGOs refused to register just because they believe that this legislation is against of Constitution of Georgia and is against of basic human rights principles, and nobody wants to register as a foreign agent. And of course, when civil society organizations in under attack, and some of organizations' bank accounts and requisites are, blocked. Of course, they can't also very effectively protect and support community-based organizations, which, also under attack, but in different way currently, yeah. So I also wanted to mention that just recently government also, not government, let's say political regime starting using criminal charges and drug checking as a, pressure in against activists in political affiliated cases, or, in some other cases, which is also practice which very well known from past years, and also very repressive mechanism and measure against, activists and community-based representatives, or, civil society or media representatives. So, yeah, what it's how, all these changes and of course financial cuts and financial decreasing are affecting our communities. But in the end, I just want to say a few maybe positive words as well, because, besides of everything, Georgia shows incredible, solidarity and incredible unity, and even all these protests are not coordinated by some persons or some, organizations, etc., and are spontaneously organized by different activists and etc. So I mean, it's really very important that we are not, following these anti-constitutional amendments and changes. And I guess it's a result why most of legislation which were adopted, or most of amendments which were adopted, not implemented yet, because resilience of civil society. And just recently, yesterday, very important international mechanisms, let's say, as a positive result of our resilience as a society, were published. European Parliament just adopted resolution against Georgia, very critical resolutions, which we waited for months, and so-called Moscow mechanism, which also very critical and crucial human rights mechanism, where published their report about human rights situation, and also very critical conclusions and recommendations were published in this report. So I guess everyone knows that before it gets better, it might get worse still, but we believe that our efforts and our solidarity and unity will get some positive results as well.
What Marie is not saying that having no opportunity to receive the international funding, majority of activists in their main job working for communities for half a year at least already receiving no funding. So volunteering completely. I don't know how they are surviving. They are sharing everything they have, like food. So the situation is really desperate. And we are all in solidarity with Georgia, and that's important for us to highlight the situation, and we hope for better justice in the country. And we are moving to European country, and I will give a floor to Peter Sarashi from Rights Reporter Foundation for short overview what is happening with the drug war there and with the legal changes. Peter.
Thank you, Anna. My name is Peter Sarashi. I'm from Budapest, Hungary. I work for a small organization. It's called the Rights Reporter Foundation, and we have a website, Drug Reporter, that publishes articles and videos around drug policy and harm reduction. So, as most of you know, Hungary has an increasingly authoritarian government. It has has been ostracizing civil society organizations that try to make the government more accountable and transparent. The situation is maybe not as bad as in the countries we heard about before, but definitely I think the worst within the European Union. And Hungary has also a very repressive drug policy, and the largest harm reduction programs were shut down in 2014. And it tells a lot that the EU Court of Justice ruled against Hungary recently for voting against the EU joint position on medical cannabis in the UN, and voting together with Russia. So that's what I think what's happening in Hungary is pretty much kind of importing Russian drug policies and also importing Russian repressive policies against civil society. And the situation has become even more concerning last year. The popularity of the government has been declining, and I think especially among urban young people. And now they are pushing back with anti-drug policies as a tool to kind of gain more control over young people. And in 2025, February, Prime Minister Orban launched a war on drugs, and he appointed a new drug commissioner, and it means that the law enforcement against people who use drugs and drug traffickers became more intense. And in May last year, they wrote into the constitution that it is prohibited to use, distribute, and promote drugs. And this, especially the promotion of drugs, that it became unconstitutional, it had a huge chilling effect among professionals and citizens that, okay, so is harm reduction promoting drugs? And what can I tell in public about drugs? Can I be even openly speak about drugs in school for students? So it really had a chilling effect. And in June, the government increased criminal penalties against drug offenders. From September 2025, the police started to raid music clubs, and there were also some notable searches at the homes of some musicians and even an opposition politician. And all those musicians were known to be critical to the government before. And in November 2025, they also issued a decree circumventing the parliament on the grounds of a so-called wartime state of emergency, which allows the police to arbitrarily shut down any music clubs or shops that are suspected of drug distribution without any court order for several months. And this means that even if they have one confession from one person that they were using or they bought drugs in a music club, the police can immediately close the club. And they are using this decree now. They are closing clubs one by one, especially those that operate in the underground electronic music scene, because, before these clubs were known to give place to concerts and events where young people were openly criticizing the government, like shouting slogans. And I think this is also about, kind of limiting those independent and free spaces and civic spaces of young people. And a similar wave of repression was before in Georgia, in Tbilisi in 2018. So we were greatly inspired by our Georgian friends, and we started to organize a kind of resistance movement against this repression, this wave of repression. And we call this movement Dance for Freedom. And we said that, if they want to take away our civic spaces, if they want to push us to the margins, then we will take back our spaces and we will bring the underground electronic music to the very center of politics, which is the Kossuth Square near the parliament. So if the government attacks culture, we defend it by living it publicly, joyfully together. So we organize dancing protests or rave protests. And the first event was organized on December 6th last year in front of the parliament. Electronic music was played by DJs, and while activists and public figures briefly addressed the crowd between DJ sets. And instead of traditional protests, we fear that sometimes people in our countries, especially in our region, become increasingly frustrated with traditional protests. That okay, I shout slogans, and I go home frustrated and even more angry than before. And dancing is a form of political protest that is kind of creates more positive feelings. And after this event, we got a lot of positive feedback from young people that unlike former traditional protests, they went home with full of hope and full of community feeling of we are together in this. And we also think that dance is more than just entertainment. It is also a kind of form of bodily autonomy. It's a form of self-expression and communal belonging. So this is a very adequate response and a form of political protest in this case. In February 28, on the last day of winter, we organized the second Dance for Freedom event in front of the parliament. And this time we also organized it simultaneously. We organized it in 3 other cities of Hungary. So we can say now that this movement is going national. And in Budapest, our event was attended by more than 3,000 or 4,000 people. There was a great media coverage, and I think this gives us a good opportunity to speak about drug policy reform. But I don't want to tell that this is very easy. It is actually very difficult to operate in this climate of atmosphere of fear, that everybody is afraid. And also the clubs are very reluctant to get on board because they deny the reality that people use drugs on the dance floor. And they don't want to be associated with the drug issue anyway. So we are also having this kind of internal fights with the clubs, also with the governments, and we try to push society to recognize that this is a problem, but what the government is doing, it's not the solution to the problem, and we need more harm reduction and environmental prevention and in dance spaces. So right now, the election day is coming soon in Hungary in April. There is a real chance, I think, now for a change of government. So everybody is kind of holding their breath, waiting for change in Hungary. But I think even after a possible change of government, we will have plenty of reason to continue this movement, and because the change is never automatic. I think we need systematic advocacy efforts to reform our drug policies in Hungary. This is it in a nutshell. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. And thank you for developing the creative way of the showing the position of civil society and youth. And we need to speed up. And I will give a floor to absolutely amazing activist Trajche Janushev from Sex Workers Advocacy Network to share the situation with intersectionality of the problem. and how we're working together as a communities.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you for inviting us. Thank you for having me here. So I will try to speed up and I will try to summarize, even though, so first I'm Trajche Janushev representing SWAN, Sex Work Advocacy Network. We are working in the region of Central Eastern Europe and Central Asia. So we have members, community-based organization, but also organization who provide services for sex workers in more than 20 countries. So starting from Mr. Mahmood, he already mentioned the different communities coming together and working together. And I would like to reflect more on this topic, and I will talk about the perspective of intersectionality, in particular from the perspective of communities that have historically been marginalized, criminalized, and excluded from the public discussions. When we speak about the shrinking space, we often talk about the restriction, as we heard about NGO, legal barriers on civil society, pressure on the human rights organization. But something what I want to highlight in this room here, on this meeting, is that we need to be more open, more specific when we are using this terminology about shrinking civic space, because not entire civic space is shrinking. Till one of us is challenging to exist or survive and we are shrinking, another part of the NGOs in our societies are rising. So we have an anti-gender movement who is rising. They have enormous sources of funding available. We have a religious group, these so-called traditional groups who are rising and working and have access to funding, and they have support from the national governments, from the local authorities, etc., etc. So basically, shrinking civic space is for us who were traditionally marginalized, and now officially the government, some governments in the region especially, wants to criminalize and totally vanish our existence and our work. Okay, back to the intersectionality. Many people affected by this restriction, what I just mentioned, do not belong to one single marginalized group. And we, as a network, as a regional networks, before this report, what was Hannah already presented, that was 2024, I think we work on intersectionality paper. And also on the regional level, also including our national focal points, our communities from the countries, we work on this report where we research the intersectionality in terms of access and needs for the services, HIV services, SRI, but also violence and all these restrictive politics, how are affecting different marginalized group. The report, Intersecting Issue, what I just explained, you can find in our web pages, is exploring how overlapping forms of marginalization across the region affect people accessing, as I say, rights to access rights, services, protection. For example, as I'm representing sex workers as a community, sex workers who belong to multiple marginalized groups face combined risk. And we have examples when migrant sex workers may fear deportation. Transgender sex workers are facing extreme level of violence and discriminalization, and sex workers also living with HIV or those who use drugs and in the same time they are sex workers encounter criminalization and stigma from multiple systems at once. When these identities are intersecting, the barriers became much stronger. It became harder to access healthcare, legal protection, social services, and justice. And when civic spaces shrinks, when our communities, our NGOs are shrinking, then few organizations that advocate for those communities and provide life-saving services are very, very weak, and they're struggling to continue with their work. We have data on this, and we are seeing this on a daily basis happening in many countries in our region. At the same time, we must consider also the broader context in which we are living and working today. We are witnessing wars, a large scale of human rights violation in our region, democratic backlashing, and the rise of the right-wing and authoritarian politics across many countries in our region, but also globally nowadays. In this context, government often target our groups, our society organization, and marginalized group in order to consolidate power or control public narratives, or simply say, I'm all of this putting in one box like cheap populism. And historically, when societies move in these directions, those who have traditionally been us, who traditionally been punished simply for our existence, whatever can be our identity, our work as sex workers, sexuality or social status, now finding ourselves even further at the bottom of the societies where we live and work. And yet, despite these challenges, many of our members, many NGOs, many community-led organizations are still continuing to play a crucial role in protecting their communities, and they are finding the way to work into this very strict and very difficult environment. Across the region, there is an organization who conduct, and it's very important to be mentioned, because in these countries we don't have a health system or health a social protection system who will provide any kind of services for marginalized groups. So our members, those organizations for what we are talking about now, they are conducting outreach work, providing harm reduction services, share health information, document human rights violation, and build the trust with the communities that often, even if they have access to some of the services on national level, they are simply afraid to approach those information, those services. It's impossible, because in some cases even meaning that you will be criminalized if you go to ask for support as a sex worker, for example. So those organizations are very often response to time of crisis. That's why I mentioned the context what we are living now. And we have also data on this. We have proofs on this during the Corona time, when sex workers was totally left behind and without any social support. The sex workers themselves or the organization organized humanitarian aid, fundraising, etc., etc. So we are the responders of crisis, whatever can be during public health emergency, humanitarian crisis, or political instability. So I will cut here, because I see Ghana is looking at me. We are short with time, and I will just finish with the sentence that before we start the event, we were joking about who is pessimist and who is optimist. I will say that I'm naturally, like always, realistically optimistic. But yeah, the truth is that we are living in a tough and difficult time, transforming time. We don't need to vanish what was built by us, by United Nations, whatever. But I think it's also time that we need also to transform ourselves, to transform on the way how we work. Again, not to vanish what we establish, what is well known and what is working good, but it's transforming time, and it's time that we need to also maybe change something. So this is my realistic, optimistic approach, I will say. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Trajche. And actually, UNAIDS also transforming. Yesterday, UNAIDS made the very strong statement with the guiding note on decriminalization of drug use as a factor or in the context of HIV response. And actually, we see that UN agencies are more honest speaking about the connection with the shrinking space, connecting with the decriminalization, and that's why we're very happy to have CEECA Regional Director of UNAIDS here with us, Eamonn Murphy, to close our discussion. And it will be hard, a lot of issues, but I believe in you.
Okay. Thanks, Anna, and thanks, colleagues, very much for convening it. I'll only pick out a few parts. As Boyan said yesterday when he was at the end, well, everything's been said. How do we bring it together? So I'll touch on a few things. We know at the CND, much of the debate's about the control frameworks and enforcement. Yet there is a space, and if we take the optimism, there is a space here where civil society can speak. Right? What we really need to look at, the practical question, is how, in the context of the different policies in different countries, how we can enable the health services to still reach people, or will they be pushed away? And this is the tension between the two. We should recognize the shrinking civic space and marginalized populations in EECA region report, jointly developed by the Rise and Decriminalize movement, particularly because it brought together the different networks to do it jointly. And this is a point that Zaved was making, because the HIV response is heavily shaped by the legal and social environment. And that's so clear in our region of EECA. The foreign agents law, it's relevant to other countries. We see in Senegal. Antons and I were talking just before about what's happening in Senegal. 2 days ago, they've now brought it in. We're seeing this happening in other parts of the world. We need to see, though, this point about the intersectionality drawn out more and more. Right? I hear time and time again about the pushback on gender, the pushback on this, the pushback on that in our region. Yet siloed responses to the human rights challenges. How do we bring that together in a more collective response? Right? And no clearer was that during the challenges in Georgia when we were seeing the changes there. We know that when the organizations are labeled, when they're restricted or pushed out of the public life, and we heard from Kazakhstan examples, and it's not always within the realm of the laws. The laws are now written in such a way that they're interpretable, and that makes it even harder. Infections will go for HIV, they'll go up, but societies as a whole are poorer because of the richness of our societies is not there. We've heard from countries today. Kyrgyzstan, when I was there and they were in the parliament debating, if you like, the evils of LGBTQI, they're already arresting imams, human rights activists, gender activists. They were arrested, but not the community they talked about. And the dynamic of that, what's being used as the way to get people on board with the more draconian changes that we're seeing. But the partners need to come together. When we look at its intersectionality, it's good that WHO, UNODC, we're here, Office of High Commissioner, other partners, UNDP. We need to work together in the UN more, as community also needs to, very quickly to get some of these. Sometimes in these environments, the question is not whether we want ideal policy, but how do we live within the realities of the constraints we're dealing with? And sometimes, even at the beginning of my career, I worked in public health on harm reduction in Australia. It was illegal, obviously, drug use. It was illegal, the services we were providing in some contexts, and police were arresting the healthcare workers, as well as the people attending them. So the change, the environment, that's suboptimal. We need the decriminalization so that people can fully access all sorts of services, not just health. So the compromise, though, is a reality that we need. A couple of the areas, we know the pressure we need to put on governments and keep them accountable. Civil society, obviously, needs to maintain a line of sight around these things. And where do we want to get to? There are some challenges here for donors in particular. The Global Fund will cut. We know that for our region, sadly. And you've already addressed where we're going to see the impact of that most immediately. But the EU needs to step up. The neighbouring countries, they are cutting funding to these, but they're also not providing funding bilaterally. And so we see them pulling back in our region. And so we need to look at what are our strategies to bring the message home that they are in this region. This is not separate to them. And how do we work on that? The other last point, you touched on the guidance on decriminalisation. We need to talk in our region how we move that forward. But we've got the high-level meeting on ending AIDS and the political declaration, which is June. It's immediate for us. How do we, across the countries in the region, start trying to advocate, and with those supportive governments, because we've got to take the optimism approach, right? And in our region, Georgia is actually co-facilitating this process with Botswana. Right? We need to have separate conversation, but it's interesting processes. It's not, they don't determine the outcomes, they facilitate. And having been part of the facilitating team on a government, you've got everyone else telling you what has to be done. It's not your own government that does that. But how do we work in that process? How are we going to get these messages out? There are supportive governments in our region. How do we work with them? How do we work with other regions where we might be able to get some of the issues of civil society and raised? So to conclude, I know we're over time. We need to look at new strategies and new approaches. How do we do this? Not just within our sector. How do we embrace other sectors? And sometimes they're resistant. They're fearful, a bit like we heard from Kazakhstan. You've got a meeting about women how is that an LGBTQI advocacy event, right? But how do we make sure that we're seeing the issues that are pushback on gender and a pushback on a whole range of others, including for people who use drugs? How do we get those connections and try and do some joint and strategic, like we heard from Peter, different ways of getting messages out, which may not be the old ways we're used to doing. So we're really going to have to rethink and work together on it, because the civic space is not just for health. It's for our societies to continue to grow and change. So thank you, Ghana, and looking forward to working with you on it.
Thank you very much for this strong message, and we all understand that undesirable for authoritarian or totalitarian regime. We are needed and desirable for our communities, and we need to serve the communities. And what I need to say that we are continue monitoring the civic space, and we are continue working with the partners all together and fighting for the best world we hope to have. Thank you very, very much for your time and passion and attention to our region. Thank you.
Thank you.